Well, welcome to the Coach's Notepad, and we're going to have our first guest today, Rob Williams, who will join us today. First of all, thank you, Rob, for accepting the invitation to our first webinar. And now, completely up to you, Rob.
Brilliant. So firstly, Juan, thanks for the invite. Hopefully some of the stuff we're going to share is going to be of use to some coaches out there, no matter what level they're working at. Just a little bit of background. So obviously me and you, Juan, have known each other a couple of years now. When I gave you a job at Walsall, so and you're still there, so that's a massive positive, and might be something I'll touch on at some point. My background really quickly is 23, 24 years of working in coaching and education in various different guises, whether that's non-league, professional game, full-time in the game, part-time in the game, and full-time in education. So kind of hopefully I've got a number of experiences that I can share that might be useful along the way. And if we've got any questions as we go, mate, feel free to dip in, tell me to stop, and throw in whatever you want, and we're all good to sort. So I'm going to share my screen. So first thing to do is you just check the one that you can see it. So you should be able to see my desktop. Is that right?
Yes.
And you should now see that little presentation. Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah. I can see your screen now. Yeah.
Let me just. There we go. That all right?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Perfect. So my intention is just to share a little bit of how we coach document. Currently, I'm working at Shrewsbury Town as head of coach development, and I've been in post for around about 7 months, there or thereabouts, having previously to that worked at Walsall in exactly the same role, though it was called head of coaching. The job was the same. And that was where me and Juan first met and first worked together. Our job as head of coaching or head of coach development is pretty much what it says on the tin, to put in place systems, procedures, opportunities for coaches working in the program to develop and hopefully get better. And a bit of background to the coach development or head of coaching program. It's a Premier League initiative. So the way it works is the Premier League fund clubs, and they ring fence the funding that clubs have to employ a head of coaching. So it means clubs can't spend that money on other jobs or the roles, or to support other roles within the club. It can only be used to employ people like myself. And we all, through that program, then we have access to our coach development through the Premier League, and then we share and pass on and develop coach development for coaches in our club. And it very much, the driving headline behind it is around developing a world-class coaching workforce. So that's kind of the principles behind it and the reasons why these jobs exist. And they've been around now for about 3.5 years, something like that. So I'm officially in my second year of that head of coaching program through the Premier League. So that's kind of where it comes from. Over the course of the past 7 months at Shrewsbury, we've started to put in place a new program around how we coach and what we do in terms of how we coach. And that's what I'm going to share with you this morning.
Great.
So this is our overriding vision for what we're trying to do. So in line with what the Premier League are looking at around developing world-leading coaching workforce, our intention at Shrewsbury is to develop a nation-leading coaching and coach development program. So what we probably mean by that is, we don't want to probably get above our station. We're a Cat 3 club, we're a Cat 3 program. We've currently probably got no potential plans moving forward to look to be Cat 2 status in terms of academy. So we need to be the best Cat 3 program we can be across the country. So that's kind of where we're at. And actually, although we're we're Cat 3, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't endeavour to be Cat 1 in terms of what we do, how we do it, the way we work as coaches and the way we support our coaches, and therefore the way we work with players. So that's our kind of overriding vision. Beneath that then, for us, that's about developing a culture of learning where the coaches feel valued as part of that learning. So as you'll well know, Juan, working at Category 3 is not glamorous. It's not pretty. It's not particularly well paid. Coaches are expected to do a lot of work for what they do receive. So that as best as possible, we need to make sure that coaches feel valued in their role. And it's not just about the money that they get for, you know, and they're not just coming into work purely for financial reasons. Because if that was the case, they probably wouldn't come and work at Cat 3. So we need to support them appropriately by developing culture environment where coaches feel valued, they want to be in the programme, they want to learn, they want to be stretched, they want to be challenged, therefore they hopefully get better. And we totally understand that may mean at times that coaches will move from us to other clubs locally, and we're surrounded by a lot of Category 1, Category 2 clubs, Birmingham City, Villa, West Brom, Wolves, etc. So there's a lot of competition and a lot of opportunities for coaches to progress if that's where they want to go. And we have to accept that part of our job is to probably develop coaches for other clubs, just like we're developing players who may end up at other clubs. And that's part of our job as well. So that's what we're hopefully working towards, and I think we're making some good progress. And then beneath that, the kind of override name is to provide them with the opportunity to develop themselves. So just because they've been in the club for a period of time, and we've got one coach, for example, who's worked at the club for 16 years, and we've got other coaches who've been with us for 8, 10, 12 months, to give them the best opportunity to get better. And that may look different from one coach to another, and what they all want and need may be very different. But our job, or my job in particular, is to provide that opportunity, and that in turn hopefully encourages them to get better, to develop themselves, in turn develop their players, and above all else, take on some responsibility for themselves. So what I mean by that is, one of the things I noticed at Walsall and also probably at Shrewsbury is very much coach development and CPD is not about doing 5 hours CPD to maintain a coaching license. If it's about that, then probably the coaches are not the coaches that you want. So coach development and CPD needs to be bigger and broader and more extensive than that. And actually coaches need to be responsible to drive their own development ideally, as opposed to their development being driven by somebody like me. So very much at Walsall, and the same here at the moment, there's very much a lot of what we're doing being driven by me, as opposed to being driven by the coaches. And it shouldn't be driven by just trying to do 5 hours, because that's the minimum requirement. So it's about developing that environment where they want to challenge and progress and take that responsibility, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Above all that, then, it's about that. So we have to recognise that it's about the player. The coaches are part of that process, but only probably a very small part of that process. Particularly at the moment, if you think about the sort of current situation we're in, and the impact that might be having. So kids not going to school, therefore, what's the impact on that and their learning and the environment they're in, and so on and so forth. Just like when they're with us, the impact that being at school will have on them as a player. So we're a very, very small part of the process. For me, in terms of my job, arguably the coach might be at the centre of the process. So my job is to support the coaches. And around that, the players are part of that process. The club is part of that process. Where they work and their full-time job is part of that process. And family and you know, support networks is also part of that. So the coach and the player need to be at the centre. But then in us getting the coaches better, that again goes back to the players being at the middle of that process. So that's some underpinning stuff that I thought I'd just kind of hopefully give you a bit of an overview of kind of where we're at, if that makes sense. I don't know if that throws up any questions from you, Juan, before I
One
fly through some
question is
stuff.
that you mentioned that you have different coaches at the moment at Shrewsbury. So you have coaches with 16 years coaching already there, and some others that have just few years at the academy, and now you have this new coach development program. Do you find any challenges with coaches that has been there for a longer period with the new ones, or do you feel that any coaches at the academy are quite open to the approach?
I think it's interesting, and you'll see this as well at the club you work in. Change is difficult, and people find change difficult. So some people and some coaches embrace it and roll with it, and they begin to see the benefits of it, and they engage with it. Other coaches maybe are less inclined to engage with it at times, and they just bring a different challenge. So actually then it's maybe about how do you generate buy-in from those coaches. And actually I think buy-in is about them seeing that there's something in it for them, and then recognising that actually by them changing the way they work within the new parameters and the new way we work, they're going to benefit from it. And in turn, hopefully they're going to enjoy it more, and therefore they and the players will benefit long term. So I think it's about generating buy-in, and I think that takes time. For some, it's very quick, and they recognise benefits quickly. For others, it's a longer term thing, and a bit more of a battle to get them to buy into that change. So what you can't do is see every coach as one big group and deliver the same thing for everybody. What you've got to try and do is make it very bespoke. Just like as a coach, you would plan a practice to meet the needs of the individuals within the group. You wouldn't necessarily plan it for the group. I think coach development is the same. You've got to try it as best as you can to make it as bespoke and individual as possible. And I'll come on to some stuff in a bit where actually that then is about investing time in getting to know the coaches. So you can start to identify actually what do they really want, what do they really need, and what's really specifically going to support them. So I think that's kind of where it's at, and that's the ideal sort of situation. I think it has to start initially with some broader brushstrokes. So you have to just put some quite generic stuff together that starts to generate some interest in what we're doing. And over time, then that starts to become more and more individualised as you get to know the people you're working with.
Okay. No, fine.
So that's some underpinning stuff. This kind of touches on that then, I guess, Juan. So this is a model that we use. And it's something that I picked up over through my development through the program with the Premier League. So whether it's working with players or working with coaches, it's all about. So if we want to reach that top part of that model, therefore we're impacting on the way people behave. There's a process to go through. And you have to recognise that at different times you'll be at different places with different people. So I can think of coaches from my time at Warsaw and also coaches now where there's definitely some behaviour change going on. They're engaging in activity, they're engaging in development, and you're seeing change in the way that they act as a coach. And there's others where maybe we're still at the other end of the staircase, so we're still at the bottom where I'm engaging in building relationships through conversation, discussion, to try and really understand where they're at and what they want. So we're nowhere near the change part yet, and there's a process to go through. And so at any stage, you may well be at a different part of that model with any individual at any point, just like you would be with a player.
Yes. And
so there'll be players who you coach who you might get change very quickly, and they buy in very quickly, and they engage very quickly. So you end up at that top end of that model very, very early. And there'll be others where it's different. So actually there's a process to go through before you get anywhere near that kind of change model, if that makes sense.
Yes. And have you found any difference between the engagement from coaches that work part-time than coaches that work full-time, or is not related their engagement into the process?
I think it's easier for full-time staff, and it's easier to progress through that model, if you like, because you're around each other more. So if you think about the active listening type bit, so when you first go into a club or a team or whatever, you need to spend time with people to get to know them. So if it's a part-time member of staff and you can only engage with them 2 or 3 times a week, and some of that time may be difficult because they're rushing to get there from work, and at the end of the session they've got to get away, so you don't have that time to sit and have a chat and a conversation, that very informal stuff. Whereas if you're full-time in the building, around people every day, that can happen every day. So it's a little bit easier probably to progress through that process with full-time staff, just because you're in the building more, you're around each other more, therefore you naturally have more time together. So I think that'll be the biggest difference. I still think that change is difficult, and I don't think it matters whether you're full-time or part-time. If you're the sort of person who finds change difficult, you're going to find it difficult whether you're a full-time or part-time member of staff, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So I think it's a process, and this is very much about us as full-time members of staff, but also the part-time members of staff recognising where they might be at with a particular either member of staff or a player, and therefore thinking about how are they going to progress through that to eventually get hopefully the change they're going to want, which might be the thing that makes a difference in terms of the player or the coach progressing. So this is something new that we've introduced to staff literally over the last 2 months.
Okay.
So very, very new. Yeah. So hopefully that makes sense. And this is similar. So it's another model that we use, both for working with coaches and for working with players. So thinking about how do we support and how much support, and then how much do we challenge, and what's the relationship between support and challenge. So there may be occasions where we may need to give lots of support. So we're at this end of the model. Can you see my cursor moving on the screen?
Yes, yes.
So we may need to be very much high support. And I think early on, we might give quite low challenge. So all we're doing is making sure that coaches are aware that there's lots of support in place for them.
Okay.
But what we don't want to do is spend too much time down this bottom half of this model. What we need to be doing is spending a bit more time in the top half of the model. Mm-hmm. So there might be times when we support lots by putting systems in place, which I'll perhaps talk about later. And we give low challenge. So we give them lots of support, but we don't give them much challenge, therefore they get put under a little bit of pressure. Or we give lots of challenge and we give lots of support, therefore we're trying to stretch the coaches and the players. So again, this is another model that we use for us as staff supporting each other, but also for coaches supporting players. Can they start to stretch and challenge their players appropriately so they get better, just like we're trying to stretch and challenge our coaches appropriately, so hopefully they get better. So if you imagine coaches who are not getting very much support, but the challenge is high, they're going to feel pressure.
Yeah.
So therefore we might need to give more support so they feel less pressure, but they're still feeling stretched. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
So hopefully the program and the processes that we put in place mean that we're in this part of this model as opposed to the bottom half of that model. So here's how we try and do that. So we will put in place a number of interventions from a coach development point of view, just like they will put in a number of interventions with their players. So some of those interventions that we deliver to coaches may be very command-based. So what I mean by that is, I'm obviously quite new in post. The academy manager was only in 6 months before me, 7 months before me, so he's fairly new to the post. He's changed the playing philosophy.
Okay.
And it's quite non-negotiable. So when we're delivering that to the coaches, we've got to be quite commanding how we deliver that. Does that make sense? So the club and the academy now, we're going to play like this. Our philosophy in possession and out of possession is this, and this is the way it's going to work. End of story. Not much room for discussion. That's what we're going to do. Just like a coach might use that sort of style when perhaps delivering some key bits of information to players, or introducing a new strategy or formation or whatever it might be. You might be quite command, so it's fairly clear this is what we're aiming towards. And there'll be other times through coach development interventions where we'll use a bit more observation and feedback. So if I'm observing the coaches while they're working, I might just have a conversation while they're delivering the session. Well, what do you think about that? Why have you done that? What do you think about your dimensions? Whatever it might be. And then off the back of that feedback, they may make some observations or do something, again, like you might with a player. Does that make sense? So,
yes, yeah.
So we will try and use the right intervention with the coaches at the right time to support their development, exactly the same as we would intervene with players.
Yeah.
So, the process is no different, really. Alongside that, then, is something that you'll have seen many times and that coaches would have seen many times. Is just this other model linked to those interventions. So are we picking the right intervention with the right coach at the right time to support their development? Just like with the player, are we picking the right intervention at the right time, using the right style to deliver that information at the right time for them? So it becomes a bit more individualistic and a bit less group driven, if that kind of makes sense. Sort of how we try to achieve that, or how we're going to achieve that, it requires planning, and effective planning, to make sure that coaches are getting what they want, just like coaches using effective planning to get what they want. And I'll show you some of our plans in a minute.
Okay.
It then needs effective co-coaching. Now, from my point of view as a coach developer, what I mean by that is it means I've got to work effectively with the other coaches. So as an example, it may be that I need to link in with someone external to the club to deliver a particular element of our coach development program. So I need to work effectively with them as a co-coach to deliver that intervention. Just like if me and you were coaching a group together, we would need to work effectively as a pair of coaches. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So from my perspective, it's not me working with another coach. It might be me working with somebody else to implement an intervention to support a coach. And then it requires some reflection. So it requires, did it work? Did it not work? Did the coach get what they wanted from that intervention? Did they not get what they wanted? And therefore, do we need to adapt, change, adjust, add something different, whatever it might be? So literally we're at a point where next week my coaches will be getting a survey sent to them where they're going to reflect back on what's happened over the past 7 months in terms of coach development. And some of that will drive what we do next season.
Okay.
We have a number of non-negotiables which we don't need to worry about. These are some sort of hopefully fairly straightforward documents that we use with coaches. So these are just some considerations for our coaches around practice design, but I would use them the same for coach development design. So does the coach development have a clear objective? So do we all know why we're using that particular intervention for coaches? Do we know how we're going to challenge the coaches within it, etc., etc.? So just like coaches plan for their practice, I need to plan for my practice in terms of what we're delivering with the coaches. Does that make sense?
Yes. Now, when you talk about practice designs, at the academy at the moment, are coaches completely free to plan and design their sessions the way they want, or do you have a set of sessions that you tell the coaches, we want you to deliver this session this way?
Good question. So we have a number of, we have almost a bit of a hybrid of that. So we have a bit of both.
Okay.
So we have, depending on how long the session is, they're made up of either 4 or 5 different parts. So as an example, every session we do has some technical component to it, some unopposed technical component, 15 or 20 minutes. And that might be, say, part 2 of the practice on that particular evening.
Okay.
Those technical practices are pre-designed. So we've got a set of 8. The coaches can choose which one of those 8 they use,
okay.
but they have to use one of those 8.
Okay.
Part 3 of the session might then be something linked to part of the philosophy. So perhaps attacking vertically as an example, but so the next 20 minutes might be an attacking vertically session, and the coaches might be free to design that practice themselves. Does that make sense? So we have a little bit of both. We have a little bit which is pre. So every session has 4 or 5 elements to it. Some are fairly set, so the coach has little option in terms of what to deliver. Other is very much the coach's choice. So we have a little bit of both. Some clubs have it where it's all the coach's choice and they design what they want. Some other clubs are very, very prescriptive and literally give the coaches every session. So we're kind of a bit of a hybrid of that, I guess, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But I still think these considerations apply. So even if they're being given a session to deliver, which already has a clear objective, which probably has some relevant challenges and constraints linked to it, which has has some game relevance, has some, so some of these things are already set. You know, they might decide to extend the distance.
Yes.
So although it's predetermined, they potentially could adjust parts of it based on what they feel is relevant for the needs of the players at that time, or to change the demand. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm going to jump into some of the bits linked to what we've talked about. So we've got 3 core bits of our coach development program, and those are the 3. So we talk about our coaches need to know the game to be effective. They need to then be good at teaching the game, and they also need to be thinking about how they can beat the game. So what's coming next? So not just thinking about where we're at this week, this month, but where's it going? So what's the bigger picture looking like? So, you know, what's the first team environment like? If we're looking at developing players for League One, what's League One going to look like in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons? What's coaching going to look like in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons? So a great example of this might be the game might be, we're currently in a position where we can't physically have players in front of us. So we have to be a little bit creative about how we engage with players, maybe through team meetings, unit meetings, positional meetings, analysis tasks done in this online virtual platform. So for me, that's part of this beat the game. So when we go back, and at some point we will go back and we'll have players in front of us again, it might be that actually for us to beat the game, we need to be using or making use of this virtual learning platform with players, because actually that might be the difference from them either progressing through the system or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So beat the game is about thinking about where are we at and where are we going and how we're going to get to where we're going. The other 2 pieces then are very much around, so know the game could be a coach doing a formal qualification. So like you're doing your advanced youth award at the moment, it might be that as part of their coach development plan, and for them to develop their knowledge, they need to go and do the next qualification. This is not me saying coach development is about qualifications, because it's not, but it's part of the process.
Yeah.
And by going on a course, you will develop your knowledge. Doesn't necessarily make you a better coach, but it gives you more knowledge. It may be around attending or accessing a webinar. So accessing, and the FA are doing loads of different webinars at the moment. So we might encourage some of our coaches to go access that webinar, because actually for you, that webinar will be really useful. So there was one last night on the foundation phase DNA that the FA delivered. So we encouraged all of our foundation phase coaches to access that webinar. And that will support their knowledge of the game. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And it may link into the teach the game, but the teaching the game may be more specific. So the teach the game bit for me would be about our coaches need to really understand what teaching and learning looks like, so that they become excellent teachers of the game. So they can therefore use the knowledge that they're developing and growing, and they can deliver it in the most appropriate way so that the players learn most effectively. So as part of that, it's how do we arm them to be really effective teachers? So as an example, next Tuesday night, we're doing a workshop with our coaches, and I've linked in with an expert in teaching and learning. And between us, we're going to deliver a workshop around planning for effective teaching and learning. So what does that look like? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So whatever we put together in terms of coach development, it will fit into one of those three different areas. It may be designed to develop their knowledge. It may be developed to develop them as a teacher and as an individual, and to support their learning. And it may be delivered and in process to support them thinking about where are we going and where we're moving towards. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
so they sort of underpin what we do. And this literally has been introduced to coaches over the last sort of 6 weeks, 2 months. So the coach development will fit across those, and the interventions we use will fit into one of those three sort of core areas, if you like. That's a messy slide, but it hopefully gives an outline to some of the processes. So if you imagine, for us to be able to do that, if we follow the blue boxes first, so one of the things we need to do is we need to assess where coaches are at. So what do they need right now to help them get better? So that's done in various ways. You'll have done it with me at Warsaw. You'll do it with your new head of coaching at Warsaw. What do you need right now to support you, or what do you think you need? And there's a real difference, I think, between what a coach thinks they need and what the coach wants. So lots of coaches will just want to go and do the next qualification, as an example, because they've done a B license, say, and they've done a youth award, and whatever it might be. So the next thing to tick off would be an A license. But just because that's what they want to do doesn't really mean that's what they need to do right now to get better. So linked to that training needs process, we need to complete what we call CCF and one-to-one work. So the coach competency framework gives the coaches a chance to assess themselves against a number of competencies. So where do they think they're really at? And actually that might then bring out, they don't need a qualification, they actually need something else. And that might be, they need more support around teaching and learning, for example. Well, they're not going to get that by doing their A license. So we need a different intervention for them to support them to become better at that. And down the line, that might lead to them at some point progressing to an A license, but right now it's not the right thing. And some of that comes through one-to-one discussion. And if we go back to that model, where active listening was at the bottom, that can only happen through that process. So conversations, discussions, helping the coach to understand, actually, although I want my A license, I now realise that I need something different. If that makes sense. That then would lead into like an action plan. So all the coaches have a development plan in place, and they're all different. So where one coach is, or this coach in particular, might originally have put on their action plan A license, that may still be on their action plan, but actually the timing of that might be 2 years to 3 years. But short term, my actions are I need to get better at being a better teacher. And to become a better teacher, I now need to do this, this, and this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think all of that, those three things, so training needs, coach competencies, one-to-ones, and action planning, all of those things start to paint a picture of where the coach is actually at. And then around that, the yellow bits and the yellow arrows, different interventions will then take place at different points. So as again, come back to it next Tuesday, there'll be a coach development intervention where we will deliver a workshop around planning to be an effective teacher and learner, because that's something we think our coaches need right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
Does that generate any questions in terms of that?
Well, I think you already answered is that sometimes when a coach wants something that is different than what they really need, is the challenge for the coach to understand what they really need, and understand the process that they need to go to before they really achieve what they really want. But as you said, is that having that feedback and continuous conversations, so the coaches understand what they really need before going to the next step, that what they want, which makes sense completely.
And I think that almost, if you think about typically, so if there's not somebody in post doing what we're doing and having those conversations, the natural thing is just to go on to the next thing that I think I need.
Yeah.
And, if I've got a B license and a youth award and whatever else, I'll probably just go, well, I just need to do my A license because it's the next thing to do.
Yeah.
And I might not look at all the bits in between that I might need to do first to just get really good at what I'm doing. And then that process sort of follows through, if you like. So as we go through the season, there's regular one-to-ones, there's regular to DAP updates. We use a greens and reds feedback process, which I'll show you in a little while. There's ongoing observations, which are planned and completed. There's then interventions in between. And then eventually we get to the point where we're kind of now at this point, I guess. So although we've lost, it's 6 weeks since we officially locked down and closed the academy. So we're at a point now where next week we'll start the appraisal process. So we're wrapping up the season. We'll do one-to-ones again with staff as we build towards going back whenever that actually happens. And there's still ongoing coach development as we go. That, I guess, is a more wordy sort of slide, which again shows some of that stuff. So extensive training needs to identify gaps and then action plan what people need to meet the individual coach's requirements. Making sure we've got a robust recruitment and induction process to support them, regular one-to-one support, and so on and so on. So it's just a wordy slide which talks a little bit about the same sort of stuff that was on the previous one. We use lots of online sharing platforms, so you'll be aware of Hive, and lots of coaches will be aware of Hive. We also use a thing called Team App, which is where we share stuff with coaches and players, and they do their reflections and that kind of stuff. Our observation process looks a little bit like this. So across the programme, using that sort of reds and greens format, coaches should be observed a minimum of 4 times by me.
Okay.
But they may be observed multiple times by their peers. So the next one talks about actually they should feed back to their co-coach at least 4 times a season in the same greens and reds format, which I'll show you shortly. And then above and beyond that, the more formal filmed sessions, if you like, where they get more detailed feedback, should hopefully happen twice a season. So they're a bit more time consuming, they're a little bit more detailed. So we do a number. So in theory, a coach should get minimum 8 observations over a season.
Okay.
So if you imagine there's whatever there might be, 20, 25 plus coaches, full and part-time working the program, times 8 observations a season, that's quite a lot that needs to be done. And then all the staff have an individual folder. So any observations we do, their feedback goes in a folder. Any reflections they do, their feedback goes in their folder, and that's all done through Hive. So we share that in one place. So that's the process for observations. You'll have seen something similar to this. I started this with you guys at Walsall. We refined it a little bit. So when they do the formal observations, they get some more detailed feedback. So an informal observation, as an example, might just be a 20-minute snapshot. So on one night, I might go and watch 3 or 4 coaches. And that might just be for 20 minutes at a time. And they will get a snapshot of feedback on what I saw during that 20 minutes. A more formal observation will get more detailed feedback. So they'll get observed for the full session. They'll be voice recorded, they'll be filmed, and then we'll use an analysis tool to break down that video in terms of, what coaching style did they use, what interventions did they do predominantly, how much ball rolling was there, how much praise, etc. did they give. So they'll get some more specific feedback linked to what they saw, and then they can watch that back and they can use that as part of their reflection. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's the tool we use. Again, you've probably seen that. We use a thing called Focus X2, really simple, just for tagging and clipping and so on and so forth. And that's our process for the more formal observing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now, when you talk about the coaching observations, obviously you talk about informal observations, formal observations, peer observations. Have you ever thought about players' observations, being the players giving the feedback about their coaches?
Yeah. So we did a piece of work. One of the things I did fairly early on, starting at the club, was I sent out a survey to all the players to give feedback about what they thought about the coaching, what they liked, what they didn't like, etc., etc. And that was shared with the staff. And then off the back of that, we had a little workshop, CPD night, where we talked about, so what if they've identified they really like this stuff, how can we maybe do more of that? And then vice versa, if they've identified things they don't like, if we think it's relevant, how can we maybe do less of the stuff they don't like? So we did one major piece of work around that, which is something I didn't do at Walsall. But then also moving forward, we're going to do, so the coaches do weekly reflections that they record. We now get the players to also do weekly reflections, and they do it about themselves. And all we've done is we've added one extra question to that reflection survey where they reflect on the coaching week.
Okay.
So coaches will get weekly feedback from players, which may impact on what they do, or it may not. So, but yeah, so we try and engage with that, just like I would put out a survey to the coaches about what they thought about the coach development work we're doing. And that may drive how we adjust or change coach development moving forward. What players say might impact on what coaching looks like moving forward. So yeah, we're doing little bits of it. And I think it's a really useful process to engage in what players think, and to not do it in person, because if you ask kids in person, what do you think? They're not going to say it was rubbish.
Yes.
So doing it in a format where they can, be fairly open and hopefully honest with you.
Yeah, and feel
safe. Probably
safe
the way to do it.
Their answer.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would think that's fairly important. This is the stuff we use. So it's a real basic standard form. So if I was to go and observe a coach for 20 minutes, And while I'm observing, I might be chatting to the coach, asking some questions about what they're doing and why they're doing it. So there's that kind of dialogue taking place in the moment. So some inaction reflection. So we're having open conversation during the session. And then the following day, I would literally just send them a form that looks like that, and it would have some information on it. So it might just be, you know what, I really like the way you did that. I loved your enthusiasm. You gave some great detail, blah, 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 blah. So there'll be 3 or 4 little bullet points in the greens, and then there will be the same in the reds. And the reds is always done as a question. So I would never put in there, I didn't like that, or I didn't like this, or I don't think that was right, or whatever. It will be, so when you said this, what did you mean? Or when you did this, what were you hoping to happen? Did you get the outcome you wanted? So hopefully it starts to generate some kind of thought and reflection. Does that make sense? As opposed to me going...
Yeah, the red is more like a reflection box for the coach.
And I've had conversations with people around whether the boxes should even be green and red. Because actually red sort of suggests negative.
Yeah.
So maybe the boxes, maybe greens and reds is the wrong term. You know, I've also seen, and we used to do at Warsaw, didn't we? What went well, even better if. But again, the even better if is kind of going, that wasn't good enough, or that wasn't right. So I'm not quite sure I've got it right, but it's the format we use currently. And then those are literally, I send them to the coach, I upload them to their personal folder. And off the back of that, there might be nothing, there might be no conversation, there might be no discussion. The coach might come back to me with some questions. We might meet and have a coffee and have a conversation about it. And it will look different for different coaches. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's just done as a support mechanism. The peer one is exactly the same. So if I was your co-coach, you might just say to me, right, give me a bit of feedback tonight. And we'll deliver the session, and then either later that night or the next day, I'll just send you some observations and comments, and then we can have a conversation about it. Or we might not have a conversation about it, which is, again, absolutely fine if I don't right now either want that conversation, need that conversation, or feel comfortable having that conversation. So that's very much open to interpretation.
And
go on.
One question, Rob. How often do you involve the lead phase coach on these observations?
As often, so I would encourage them to be doing these over the course of a season. So we're not specific, because both of our lead phase coaches coach an age group.
Okay. So
it means they're not free all the time to float around, because they've got responsibility to coach as well. So if I know I'm going to have a conversation, say with another 12s coach, I will tell the foundation lead and go, look, do you want to be in it? And if he wants to be in it, he can be in it. And if he doesn't, he doesn't, and that's fine. They are always in the formal one-to-ones. So we will do 2 formal one-to-ones a season. So they'll sit in those. But other than that, it's quite ad hoc. It's quite informal. And they'll also sit in the appraisal as well. So they'll be part of the appraisal process.
Okay.
Come the end. So bit of both, bit of formal stuff, bit of informal stuff. The other thing that we do, if I get a chance, and bear in mind these observations that I do could be on a match day as well. So I might go on a match day and just sit in the dressing room and have a listen and give some feedback. I might stand on the sideline, have a listen, give some feedback. And I might also voice record stuff. So obviously when they're doing the formal stuff, it's filmed and recorded, but I might just, so for example, on a match day, I might be on the sideline with the coaches, and we're just chatting about what's going on in the game, whatever else. And then when it's an interval and they're doing their little team talks, I'll voice record it and I'll just share that as part of the informal process.
Okay.
So they can listen to what they said, how they said it, and it might impact on their reflections. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There might be 1 voice recording, there might be 3, you know, whatever it is that we do. So we use that voice recording process for that, which actually they really like. And it's really easy to do. You can literally just turn your phone on and send it to them on I attach them to the feedback, but you can just send it on WhatsApp or whatever else. So we use that. We then have this is the more formal stuff. So when they're formally observed, some of the criteria that you'll see on the left of that table is taken from our coach competency framework.
Okay.
They would then get some more detailed feedback against those. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
As opposed to the informal stuff, it's a little bit more detailed. So when they get formally observed, you can see there they get a lot more detailed feedback linked to what they're doing. And again, as well as me filling that in, I would expect them to fill that in as well. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I might comment on how effectively I thought they worked with their co-coach. They will also put a comment in that box. Does that make sense? So again, it's a two-way process.
Yeah.
And again, it's all designed to make them think about what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're doing it. And working effectively with their co-coach, as an example, they then, off the back of that, they don't need to go on a course for that. They don't need to go and do a qualification for that. What they need to do is practice and work at being more effective working with their co-coach. So, that's the process we use for those. There's other things we have in place. So we have key terminology, key language we want coaches to use.
Sorry, Rob,
Again,
can I interrupt you 1 second?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, going back to this, especially with the co-coaching.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is your first season at Shrewsbury, but after this appraisal, going through the year and see how coaches work together, do you plan next season to put coaches together depending on the way they get together and how they complement each other?
Yeah. So we're literally having those conversations like right now. So since coming in, obviously I've had no influence really on who works with who and whatever else, because they were already working when I started. So one of the things we did with the coaches is I using some of the sort of quite standard things that are out there. We did some work around personality types and learning preference with the coaches. And what I've done, and so that sits alongside their DAP. And you'll know, and other people will know, that there are some personality types that fit better with other personality types. So part of our discussions recently has been, while we're looking at who works with who and who fits best with which phase, which age group, etc., we're looking at which coach might fit best with which coach. And although it won't be driven by anything about personality type and learning preference, that's part of our thinking. So, there arguably are certain personalities that shouldn't work with others based on research and stuff that you read. Now, although that shouldn't be taken as, facts and gospel and whatever else, it might influence who we put with who a little bit next year. But then some of it is influenced by just what we see and what we feel, So we've got some super enthusiastic coaches. Their personality really outgoing, really driven, really motivating. We've got others who are not like that. So we're thinking about, do we want two of those coaches together, or actually do we need to split those two coaches up so that they then work with someone who's slightly different to them? So it gives the players a different person to work with and a different voice, and it doesn't all sound the same. So without a doubt, we're literally just going through that process right now. So just like it would be if we were in the club and working, we'd be going through that process now. So we'll complete appraisals over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then come the end of that process, we'll then go back to the staff with going, right, here's where we want you to work next season.
Good.
So yeah, absolutely right. Just like we did at Walsall, 12 months ago or whatever it was, when we moved a few staff around to try and, one, benefit the staff, and two, benefit the players.
Yeah.
So I think it's good for staff not to always be with the same person. And it's good for the kids not to always be with the same coaches and around the same type of coach, if that makes sense.
Yes.
For sure. And then other bits, yeah, like I was getting to, look, academy terminology, different clubs will have different things in place. We didn't have this in place at all until I came into post. We've now come up with some terminology. It may not stay like this. It fits with the way we play. So we've got some in possession, out possession terms, nothing that people won't have seen before. But then what we have done, or what we are doing, is we're starting to put together a video that supports that.
Okay.
So it's all well and good us, spending time with the coaches and showing them this stuff, but it's just words on a bit of paper. So we're trying to bring that to life a little bit. So it's not ready yet, but we're pulling together a document which will have video clips which link clearly to those words, so the coaches can see it. The clips will be clips of our own players doing it, and also elite players doing it, so they can see what it looks like. And then we'll also share that with players and parents, so they'll hopefully start to understand, right, okay, so that's what the coaches mean by half term when they say it. That's what the coaches mean by, I don't know, let's have a look. That's what the coaches mean by play forward when they say it. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm obviously implementing these key terms and terminology to the players. Do you do it in a progressive way? So let's say the under nines, the idea is for them to learn only 3 or 4 key terms on in possession, out of possession. But when they get to under 12, they should have learned 10 in possession, out of possession terms.
Yeah.
So it's more progressive than just sending all the terminology in one go
Yeah.
to the players.
So, yeah, great point. So what we've done is, bear in mind it didn't exist. So this hasn't yet gone to the players.
Okay.
So this we got to the point it's at now in January. We were, the nature of the beast is, before it was the end of March. The video hadn't really started being put together. We'd done a workshop with the coaches around the language and the terminology.
Okay.
So they were starting to use it, or more so, they weren't all using different terms for the same thing. So we've actually made really good use of this time we're at a point where the video is starting to take shape. So once we've then got to that point, that's when I think we'll start to share it more widely with players and parents. And absolutely right, yeah, we wouldn't expect an under 9 to know as much as an under 12, to know as much as an under 15. But what we'll do initially is we'll share it all. So these are the terms you'll hear our coaches use. So this is what it means. This is what it looks like. Ideally, eventually it will become terms that players use. So on the pitch, players might be saying to each other, play forward, play round, build out, or whatever it might be. So it becomes more common. Yes. And listen, we're talking about a process that could take months, years to really embed in the program. Yeah. So we're literally at the start, and it's almost, I think, really interesting. Obviously, when I started at Walsall, there was nothing. There was a lot of this that wasn't in place. There was no coach development. I'm almost back at the start again. So in the last 7 months, we've been implementing some fairly standard processes and procedures that weren't in place. And again, come back to some of the things I talked about at the start about change. This is a lot of change for people to kind of get their head around. So we're, it's going to take a period of time to implement it.
Yeah.
And really, that's probably where we're at, I think, in terms of coach development stuff. And that's probably, I think, hopefully gives you and anybody who might have a look at this a bit of an insight in terms of what we're doing from a coach development standpoint, recognising that by developing the coaches, that's going to automatically and immediately feed into the players. So the players hopefully obviously become better. We get more in the first team, and and so on and so forth.
Good, good. Good. Well, Rob, thank you so much for giving us this time to talk about the coaching development program. So what we're going to do, we're going to obviously to share this video in YouTube, and I'm going to ask anyone who sees the video to, if they want to comment any questions, just to make the comment, and I'll pass this question to you, so we can answer these questions through the YouTube page. Is
No
that
problem.
right?
Yeah, listen, I think things like this are, and listen, this is not me saying this is the right way to do it. It's just the way we do it. At the minute, it's working for us. It's in a good place. So, but there's other ways that other clubs will do stuff, and I think this kind of online sort of sharing type thing is obviously becoming more and more common at the minute with the nature of the situation we're in, and more people are willing to share and show people stuff. So anyone who wants to know anything, wants any more detail, listen, I'm absolutely fine with any questions being sent across, and or you sharing my email address, and people just coming contacting me, and if I can, I'll help and share what I can where I can, and that's for me part of the process. And again, that's part of the coach development process, isn't it? Come back to what we've talked about. That's about, if you want to find it, there's so much sort of information out there. Then there's more information now being shared by people than probably ever before.
Yes, yes.
So yeah, no problem with that at all, mate.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much, Rob, for your time, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Pleasure, mate.